stop with that. If any of you have any questions, I'm glad to respond. Yes?
Yes, several years ago, Congress passed legislation to encourage federal agencies to commit telecommuting companies, and it's been successful. 7% of federal employees now telecom. Wondering what your thoughts are on comparable measures to encourage businesses and private sector companies to encourage telecommuting in order to reduce gas consumption.
Well, I think it's a good suggestion. You folks here in the back, I think maybe you couldn't. Let me sort of repeat it. He was pointing out that a few years ago we did pass legislation to try to require the federal government to do a better job with facilitating telecommuting by employees as a way to reduce energy use. And he was saying, why don't we consider doing the same thing for the private sector and provide some incentives for private companies to do that. I think it's an interesting idea, and I think we need, frankly, we need to do a little homework about how successful we've been with the federal effort and look into it, but I think it's a good suggestion. Yes?
In the wake of the Lieberman-Warner bill that was done entirely within the Environment and Public Works Committee, do you feel that your committee should have a larger, more explicit role on the next Congress when climate legislation is taken?
Well, I think there's a real desire on the part of people on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, both Democrats and Republicans, to be heavily involved in the issue, and we expect to be. Exactly what role we will have in any actual preparation of legislation, I don't know, but I think we've had a great many hearings and workshops looking at different aspects of the issue up till now, and we will continue that through the rest of this Congress, and I'm sure in the next Congress. Yes?
What's your timeline on passing climate change legislation next year and the year after? What's the realistic view?
Well, realistically, I think it's very much up to the next president as to what order Congress proceeds to deal with some of these issues in. If the president makes this the first item of business, then Congress, I think, will try to follow through and respond. If this is put off until later in the first or second year of an administration, then I think Congress will probably accede to that. Yes?
I've been in the environmental regulatory business for quite a while, and I know that the air pollution field, we've done cap and trade kinds of things, and the bubble policy is the same sort of thing. The economists tell us that all of this is far less efficient than some kind of a tax mechanism. And I'm not sure that I see any real inconsistency between putting on a cap and trade program as your primary regulatory tool, but then introduce a gradually, very low level carbon tax that, as you say, we need to know the right level. We'll find the right level over time and establish the expectation that there will ultimately be a cost to using carbon in all uses, whether some of which will likely cover by the cap and trade. Seems to be adding that kind of a mechanism without a lot of light at the beginning, but with an understanding that it's going to be gradually phased in.
No, I think that's an interesting suggestion. It's very possible that some combination of these strategies that I mentioned would make more sense than just picking one and not pursuing any of the others. I just don't know what, again, I think it'll be up to the next administration whether it wants to get behind something other than or in addition to a cap and trade proposal. Yes? Well, I think there are a variety of things we've been trying to do to promote more use of renewable energy. and more production of renewable energy. And of course, the most immediate thing is our efforts to pass the bill which has come over from the House to extend the tax credits. Most of these are tax credits to the production tax credit for wind, the investment tax credit for solar, various other tax provisions that are intended to encourage more renewable energy production and use and more efficiency. I hope we can get that done during this short work period here the next several weeks. I think the Majority Leader intends to try once again to get that legislation accomplished. We also, of course, have proposed and tried to pass a renewable electricity standard, requirement on utilities to go ahead and produce a certain percent of their power from renewable sources. We've failed so far. I think that's still a top priority to get something like that in place. I think it would make very good sense for us to have that nationally. So those are the two areas where I think we're trying to more directly encourage use of renewables. Yes? I'm probably not the right one to answer that question. That's clearly not something that's the Energy Committee is likely to have primary jurisdiction on. I think that, frankly, any new treaty involvement is going to have to be determined by the next administration, and then Congress, I think, will come along and play its appropriate role in trying to ratify, or debate, and consider whatever the administration chooses to do in these areas. But I don't think it's realistic to think that the Senate is going to set the agenda for what we ought to be doing internationally. I think the next president's going to do that, and I think the area where we can make the most contribution, we in the Congress and we in the Senate, is to come up with a proposal for controlling greenhouse gas emissions here, as we've been trying to do, that gives us credibility when we go into international negotiations. Yes? Yeah.
You mentioned, you spoke quite eloquently about the need to avoid the temptation to spend some of the revenues that a bill is raised through allowance auctions or allowance sales for noble purposes that have little or nothing to do with addressing climate change. What could you give us an idea of what you would spend that money on? I imagine helping low-income households adjust to higher energy prices might be something that meets that test. What else?
Well, I think clearly we're going to have a very major investment in research and development of new energy technologies over the next couple of decades. We're going to have to ramp that up substantially, and this report I referred to, this International Energy Agency report on technologies, energy technologies, makes that case very persuasively. So from my perspective, it would make sense to use revenues generated through a cap and trade system to make that investment, because I think that investment is directly related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, although not immediately. Now, you're right in suggesting that, we got the report from McKinsey I guess earlier this year, which said that in their view, increased efforts at weatherization were the most effective, cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I could see a substantial increase in the federal government effort to help with that. That's another example. Yes?
We have this letter from 10 of your colleagues. How steep a climb is that going to be in overcoming some of those objections as climate change legislation?
But which letter is that? We got a lot of letters around here.
10 largely Midwestern Democratic senators expressing some
Oh, right.
Right.
Right. I don't think there was anything in that letter that was inconsistent with what I said this morning. I think they were indicating their concern that legislation be workable in a variety of ways. And as I say, I had no problem with what they said in their letter. I think those are valid concerns. We need to try to address them in any legislation that we try to enact. Yes?
Hi, Senator. Your discussion about the need to make sure that there's not this patchwork of various different state-level programs would supersede or protect those programs. Is that part of the bill that you introduced with Senator Specter and subsequently new legislation on new Congress that would some of those supersede those state programs?
I don't think our legislation that I introduced with Senator Specter specifically addressed that. But it's my view that to have a good, workable, rational, enforceable system, we should try to be sure that we don't have a variety of cap and trade systems in place at the same location, so that businesses could know if they're in compliance with the cap and trade system that's enacted on a national level. They would at least have met that requirement. That doesn't mean they will have met all the other requirements that a state or a locality might impose on them related to energy efficiency. But at least they wouldn't have to be obtaining allowances in order to, and turning in allowances in various cap and trade systems. That's my own view of a rational way to proceed. Now that's, I'm sure, objectionable to a lot of folks. And as I say, the states have, particularly the states involved with RGGI, California's moved ahead aggressively. Some others have begun to move ahead, and they're to be commended for taking it on, because there's certainly been a lack of leadership here in Washington. I haven't made any judgment as to whether we would try to introduce a new improved version of our other bill or not.
Excuse me, why don't we take 3 more questions, because I know the Senator has other commitments.
Yes?
Would you consider resetting the price, which is set at $12, to keep up with the carbon prices that we're seeing on the European emissions trading system, just to readjust it to reflect what current carbon prices are?
Well, I think clearly we would want to revisit a question as to what is the appropriate level for a safety valve. The bill that Senator Specter and I introduced that had a $12 safety valve in it, that was about a year ago we introduced that bill. There's been a lot of change since then, and I don't think there's likely to be a lot of change between now and the time we get into a new Congress. So I think that's very much a movable issue. Yes?
Senator, if you're against creating new bureaucracies in this program,
I'm having trouble hearing.
if you're against creating new bureaucracies on this carbon program, is that something you would oppose the idea of a Federal Reserve type board as laid out in more legislation to take over the carbon markets?
Well, I don't know that would say I'm necessarily opposed. I just think that as a general matter, the point I was trying to make is, as a general matter, we've got a lot of agencies in the federal government right now. We ought to try to find ways to use those agencies to accomplish the objectives we have in this legislation, instead of trying to set up new agencies or boards with very expansive powers. I think that just, I think there are a lot of problems involved. We've encountered that, frankly, in our efforts to establish a loan guarantee program in the Department of Energy, which is nothing near as complicated or major as setting up some of the new entities that have been contemplated as part of climate change legislation. Say again? Well, I think the setting up of that so-called Federal Reserve type board was put forward as a cost containment provision. I would prefer myself to have something that would more directly control costs, such as a safety valve. That's what we had in our bill. I think that there's just a lot of uncertainty about who might be appointed to a new board, how the board would function, what they would determine in the future. It's all very uncharted territory.
One last question.
I think we waited them out.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.